Okay, well, hello and welcome everyone to our webinar today, Establishing a Successful Brownfields Job Training Program. Next slide. So Steve or Tim, we need the next slide, please.
That's on my screen and it's not moving.
It's not moving. Well, I'll say that I'll keep going. I know a little bit what to say. Oops. So I'm Blaze Levin. I'm the Executive Director of the Kansas State University Technical Assistance to Brownfields program. And our hope today is to accomplish three things as far as goals for the webinar. We hope to help you understand the benefits that Brownfields job training programs provide to communities revitalizing brownfields. That's goal number one. Goal number two is to help you identify, compare, and interpret the 8 Brownfields job training program components. And number three, we hope to leave you in a position to where you can evaluate and determine an appropriate path forward if you're interested in pursuing an EPA Brownfields job training grant. We will be asking you to provide some feedback on this evaluation at the end of the program, or on feedback on this webinar at the end of our program here. So please kind of keep these goals in mind, and we'd love your feedback on how we did. Next slide, please. So a few just housekeeping things. If you experience issues with your connection, say after you've seen this slide, go ahead and jot down the phone number and the email address here, and Tim Hunter will assist you in getting back connected if you somehow get disconnected. Also, this presentation is being recorded, and the slides and a companion document with more detail about what's been presented will be available on the event website that a link is being placed in the chat box for. So you may save that link if you'd like, and go to our ksutab.org webpage and find the event, download those documents. Next slide. Yeah, and so basic Zoom etiquette. Please make sure you're muted and your video is turned off. Please click the participants icon at the bottom of your screen and rename yourself to show both your name and your organization, because we want to see and have you fully represented here. And lastly, feel free to submit questions using the chat feature addressed to everyone. Next slide. Okay, so here's our agenda. Myself and Matt Washy with EPA will do the introduction. And then Nolan Curtis, Mike Sinu, and Steve Fenton will get down into the details of explaining the 8 components of Brownfield's job training programs and how to start, conduct, and sustain a successful program. We'll then have a success story presented by Janet Curley with Santa Fe Community College, and then we'll wrap up, answer some questions, and give you a chance to complete that all-important evaluation. I would like to encourage you to download the agenda that's available at the link in the chat box being put in there for you. We're going to talk about a lot of things, and if you've got that agenda handy, you'll probably be able to keep track of where we're at throughout the program. Next slide. Okay, so to get started with the introduction, I'm going to talk about a few key terms that illustrate how job training programs benefit communities who are redeveloping brownfields. So the official definition of a brownfield is in this slide at the top. They're essentially distressed properties with suspected or real environmental issues that are holding up a beneficial reuse of that site. So an example of that is in Little Rock, Arkansas, on the left, a former Veterans Administration boiler plant that the community identified and prioritized for redevelopment into a homeless shelter for children, which is a big problem in that area, that part of the city. And they were able to work with a county state and federal brownfields programs to get resources to do the environmental assessment and cleanup, so that the site was cleared for redevelopment of the Our House children's shelter that provides temporary housing for up to 150 homeless kids. So Brownfield's job training grants assist with training the environmental technicians that that help accomplish the assessment and cleanup functions at Brownfields, and that's a foundational focus of these job training programs. Next slide. So the term environmental justice is about attaining the fair treatment and meaningful involvement of all people, regardless of income, race, color, national origin, tribal affiliation, and other things that sometimes are discriminators in local decision making. So a situation where people are disproportionately exposed to pollution, say by living in close proximity to pollution sources and environmentally impacted land such as brownfields, those are environmental justice issues. And assessing and cleaning up those brownfields into community assets with the community involved is one way to address those environmental justice issues. Next slide. So the recent influx of huge amounts of funding through the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law and Inflation Reduction Act to allow communities to implement infrastructure, clean energy, climate resilience, and other projects while creating good paying jobs, addressing environmental justice, and boosting local economies is creating a bigger demand and an opportunity for revitalizing brownfields. A good example of an infrastructure project that actually has been going on long before this recent tranche of funding became available is in Springfield, Missouri. And so if you look at the picture or the image on the right, the city led a community planning process that determined to create a 3-mile long linear park with attractive amenities and lakes and wetlands to accommodate periodic floods, and basically clean up a bunch of brownfields and to catalyze redevelopment of the area. And it's been very successful. On the very east side of this corridor was a big quarry. In the middle was a flooded out, pretty much defunct commercial and industrial area. And on the left or on the west was a former rail maintenance and storage facility. KSU TAB helped get involved or helped collect community input for redevelopment of that west end of the park. It's called the West Meadows segment of that linear park. We collected community input and summarized the layout of the site once it was cleaned up and revitalized. And an EJ community lives just to the south of this park. And they provided input, and we included in the plan a desire for recreational trails, pedestrian bridge for access to this area across some active railroad tracks. And so their wants and their needs, were met in a number of ways. And this has been a very successful redevelopment project over the years. It's attracted hundreds of millions of dollars in redevelopment, and it's still in progress. But let's go to the next slide, please. So on the very left is an image of a part of the rail maintenance and storage area. And you can see where various buildings were, and the yellow dots is where environmental samples were collected for assessment and cleanup work. And also in the picture are the different environment-related trades that were involved in assessing and cleaning up the site. And in addition to the kind of straight-up environmental technicians that help with environmental assessment and cleanup, there's quite a few other trades involved too, right? The drillers that help collect those samples, the heavy equipment operators that actually excavate and segregate and haul off contaminated materials and regrade the site are included. The folks that actually replanted the site according to the planting plan that K-State Tab helped with. They're all, all a part of the picture. And again, it's those job training grants that train folks, with the environmental certifications needed for those trades. Springfield now has a Brownfields Job Training grant that provides 15 environmental worker certifications that are prerequisites for many of these trades, beyond kind of the environmental technician ones, some of which I mentioned, but also some that even could have something to do with the end uses of brownfields. And for this reason, Brownfields job training programs really help meet a large variety of local workforce needs that actually lead to sustainable community revitalization. Next slide. So the organization I'm with, the Technical Assistance to Brownfields program, has a grant from EPA to provide free technical assistance to communities, nonprofits, and tribes redeveloping brownfields with respect to the planning, the dealing with the environmental issues, the community and economic redevelopment issues, as well as job training issues. And that includes review of draft job training grant applications. And as it turns out, an application period just started, and the due date for those applications are August 10th. So I really encourage you to reach out to the different regional tab providers. The links are on the screen, and specific points of contact are in slides towards the end of the presentation. And we'd be glad to help. It's free. There's no application process. You just reach out and call. Next slide. So I'll pass this over now to Matt Washy, with EPA Office of Brownfields and Land Revitalization, who actually leads the job training grant and program efforts for the EPA. Go ahead, Matt.
Thanks, Blaze. And yeah, just to clarify, the request for application deadline is August 15th, just so we don't confuse people. But thank you. As Blaze said, National Brownfields Job Training Coordinator here in EPA. I'm in the Office of Brownfields and Land Revitalization, and I'm based out of headquarters in Washington, D.C. You can go next slide. So since this program was started in 1998, EPA has recognized the importance of community participation when revitalizing abandoned and contaminated properties. It made little sense to invest in infrastructure and economic development when the surrounding communities continued to experience high levels of poverty, crime, and lack of employment opportunities. Next slide. For some history and background of the program, EPA awarded its first 11 Brownfield job training grants in 1998, and by 2001, over 1,000 individuals had completed and graduated from a Brownfield job training program. Since that time, the program has grown and expanded. To date, EPA has funded 414 job training grants, resulting in approximately 21,700 individuals being trained, and over 16,200 of those individuals have been able to obtain sustainable employment, earning an average of $15 an hour. And over the last 5 years, the average starting wage has been approximately $21 per hour. This equates to a cumulative placement rate of approximately 75% since the program was created in 1998. Next slide, please. So the Brownfields Job Training Program is designed to recruit and train unemployed and underemployed residents from communities that are impacted by the presence of brownfields, whether that be waste facilities, blighted properties, or contaminated sites, and place them in environmental jobs that may have otherwise been filled from workers outside of the affected community. This program is intended to further environmental justice by ensuring that residents living in areas historically affected by economic disinvestment, health disparities, and environmental contamination have an opportunity to reap the full benefit of the revitalization and the environmental cleanup of their community, and ultimately help individuals develop the skills and knowledge necessary to obtain employment. By going through a job training program and earning certification, graduates improve their marketability to employers and ensure that employment opportunities are not just temporary contract work, but full-time sustainable employment in the environmental field. Along with setting up graduates for a successful future, these jobs also reduce environmental contamination and build more sustainable futures for communities. Next slide, please. So for requirements of receiving Brownfields job training assistance include the following conditions. Grantees must target unemployed or underemployed individuals that are residents living in or near an area adversely impacted by the presence of brownfield sites. It must be an eligible entity, such as a government-associated agency, tribe, or nonprofit organization. You must not duplicate other federally funded environmental job training programs. And you must provide the OSHA 40-hour hazardous waste operations and emergency response, or HAZWOPER training to all your trainees in your program. And lastly, you must meet the threshold criteria as outlined in Section 3B of EPA's request for applications, or otherwise known as the RFA. And you can go to the next slide. And yeah, I'm going to just turn it over now to Mike, Steve, and Nolan for most of the remainder of the webinar. Thank you.
Okay, next slide, please. Thank you, Blaze and Matt, for laying out this foundation for us. So we're going to begin the first of the sessions and starting your program. Next slide. So during this webinar, as you were told, we'll discuss 8 components of establishing a successful Brownfields Job Training, or BJT, program. And we've divided into 2 groups: starting your program and then conducting and sustaining your program. This webinar is being recorded, and we've prepared a companion document that covers all of the points being discussed today. So some of you are scribbling notes frantically. You can relax a little bit because all of these are in the companion document that comes with the webinar. Next slide, please. So again, just to outline the opportunity, the EPA Brownfield Job Training Grant is up to $500,000 for up to 5 years. The request for application was issued on May 17, and the application deadline is August 15. For more information, you need to go to the EPA website, and you can download all of the information about the grant. Next slide, please. So the decision to apply for EPA job training assistance can be daunting. And unlike many grants, the EPA application requires considerable effort for program planning, data collection, partnership development, and community interaction before the grant can be written. Well, this year's funding announcement provides 90 days to write and submit the application. Background effort required to respond to evaluation criteria can sometimes take months to assimilate. Communities interested in establishing an environmental job training program need to begin planning their program as early as possible. After submission, communities can expect to wait 3 to 4 months for the good news that their application for assistance has been funded, and another 12 months before the first training cohort begins. Despite the long lead times and a detailed application process, communities have found the benefits associated with establishing an EPA job training program reach far beyond the first grant. And among the many benefits are that the Brownfield job training programs facilitate the cleanup of local brownfield areas. Community job training facilitates economic development and environmental justice in underserved neighborhoods. And the Brownfield job training programs create a pool of vetted, qualified technicians, providing a workforce for local contractors. And that's just to name a few of the many benefits. Next slide, please. The first step before a decision is made to move forward with the Brownfield job training program is finding a project manager, demonstrating the community need for such a program, and establishing an ad hoc or working committee. A champion or advocate is the individual who serves as program organizer, taskmaster, and perhaps project manager as the job training effort develops. Every job training program begins with a project advocate. Initially, project advocates may be the only team member selling the Brownfields job training program. If they're successful, candidates will come forward offering support and identifying potential resources and introductions to potential partners as community support grows for establishment of a job training program. Once a project manager has been recruited, their initial task will be convincing others of the benefits associated with the job training program for the communities that might be served. Next slide, please. The next step is the identification of resources that will be required to implement a successful job training program. All of these are critical resources for your program. Next slide, please. Having identified program resource requirements, the project manager needs to begin identifying and recruiting an ad hoc working committee. Development partners will be part of a founders working group responsible for program planning and resource acquisition and leveraging. It should be noted that many organizations applying for EPA job training assistance are small and do not have staff available to develop the initial proposal. It's not unusual for a single person to fill many, if not all, of the positions. Larger nonprofit and governmental organizations can use a combination of partners working part-time to develop and administer the program. When individuals are available, an ad hoc group is formed in the early stages of the program and usually goes on to participate in and support the program as it matures. When necessary, team members may need to assume multiple responsibilities. And so you can see that there's a lot of different hats that need to be worn. Next slide, please. It should be noted here that grant application development is not an allowable cost when considering federal assistance. Efforts need to be supported with in-kind contributions. Roles, responsibilities, and time commitments need to be clear as program development proceeds. Do not underestimate the time and effort needed by team members. With a working group in place, milestones and commitments from each working partner need to be established. Once again, the request for applications for the Brownfield Job Training Program was issued May 17, and the application closing is August 15. Once a development team is in place, it's time to begin addressing the critical issues associated with successful job training programs. I'd now like to hand over the program to my colleague, Steve Fenton. Next slide.
Okay, thanks, Nolan. Again, folks, my name is Steve Fenton. It's a pleasure for me to be here with you today. I'm going to talk about community and labor market assessments. So in this section, I'll be providing an overview of community and labor market assessments, how to identify target communities that are best suited for a job training program, and how to conduct community and labor market assessment. So let's begin. Community and labor market assessments are two of the most important components of a job training program. When programs fail to meet their intended goals, it is often because the community and labor market analysis did not adequately identify student and employer needs. Careful selection of a target community combined with an assessment of employer needs should be the first steps in job training program development. There are two essential questions that need to be answered when selecting a community in which to operate, and they're in front of you now. Are prospective participants, community residents, and governmental organizations willing to support a job training program? And is there sufficient employer interest in considering graduates for employment? Properly conducted community and labor market assessments will answer these questions and, in addition, can guide recruitment, training, retention, and placement strategies throughout the life of the job training program. Community and labor market assessments need to be updated on a regular basis and are essential for operational programs. When placement rates begin to drop, employers' needs begin to shift, or community interest begins to dwindle, periodic assessments can realign program, industry, and community needs. Community and labor market assessments are much more than simple information gathering efforts. When done properly, they can form a solid base upon which to direct and implement the entire job training program. There are several tools that will help to provide generalized information about the economics and demographics of the community. And these efforts include three tools that I'd like to talk about briefly. The first is the Environmental Justice Screening and Mapping Tool, which is a massive database combining environmental and demographic indicators in maps and reports. EJ Screen also identifies and locates Superfund sites and major emitters in the community. EPA's Cleanups in My Community screening tool is a database that provides detailed information on potential remediation sites and remediation activity. And third, the Climate and the Economic Justice Screening Tool, referred to often as CJEST, is a geospatial mapping tool that identifies areas across the nation where communities are faced with significant burdens. Now, as a side note, I'd like to point out that in each EPA regional office, they have an environmental justice office and staff that can help you navigate the EJ screen and CGIS tools so that you can do a data pull for your own area. So don't hesitate to contact your regional office for assistance. And as Blaze mentioned, at the back of the presentation and in the companion manual, we have contact information for the regional coordinators along with the tab folks that he mentioned. So comprehensive community assessments also include additional activities such as assessing neighborhoods to consider what the participant interest is, the lack of employment opportunities, perhaps lack of training opportunities. Maybe there's also some environmental justice issues. And perhaps there's a strong sense of community pride. These are things that you can uncover when you do a thorough assessment of the neighborhood. You can identify community stakeholders interested in environmental remediation, locate community organizations willing to participate and promote the job training program, identify and establish leveraging opportunities for the selected target market, and secure training locations and access to transportation options for both training and employment, which is essential, and determine special factors and designations attributed to the selected target community. Special factors might include things like opportunity zones, enterprise zones, redevelopment zones, maybe community development projects. You can also uncover things like plant closures, chemical spills, accidents, other things that may impact the community in which you're targeting. After addressing these geographic issues and the community interest, and attention needs to turn towards demographics. Successful job training programs recruit and graduate students with varying backgrounds, including women, minorities, and underserved ethnic groups, veterans, Native Americans, individuals with disabilities, or formerly incarcerated individuals are a few of the groups that you may be targeting. The labor market assessment, and let's kind of pivot to that now, is a broad term that includes general economic development data, detailed surveys of organizations, neighborhood studies, and specific one-on-one interviews with potential employers. It provides the first step needed to develop long-term relationships with potential employers. A comprehensive labor market assessment is essential because they address several detailed questions that you want answers to. For example, some of the questions might be, what is the demand for workers in specific locations? What skills and certifications are associated with available jobs? What are the education and training requirements associated with those jobs? Are there any restrictions or constraints associated with entry into available jobs? And are there any future workforce expansion plans for specific projects? So where are potential employment opportunities for job training graduates? As you can see, this list is quite extensive and actually not all encompassing. And Blaze kind of pointed out in his intro, you can find graduates of job training programs on a lot of different work sites. We have some that have joined unions, local government organizations, temporary employment firms, serving as consultants, manufacturing and chemical refining facilities, municipal facilities and utilities, asbestos and lead. A lot of graduates tend to go into those, work for those firms. Construction and deconstruction companies, transportation, material handling, scrap and recycling, storage and landfill operations, current city and municipal contractors, and many more. This just kind of gives you an idea of where some of those jobs are. A labor market assessment may be done on a large or small scale. In the context of job training programs, the labor market assessment is usually a local effort and is essential to determine the extent and type of education and training needs of local employers. To complete comprehensive labor market assessment, several activities should be considered. Distribute a survey to potential employers. This survey can be sent to all potential employers or to a representative sample. I would tend to opt for sending to the larger group because sometimes the return rates are low. And if you're sending a survey out to employers by snail mail, I would definitely include a self-addressed stamp envelope that will increase your return rate. When possible, convene a focus group of potential employers and city contractors to collect information through a strategic group interview where you can actually drill down and gather as much information as possible. And then conduct a one-on-one or face-to-face interviews with individual employers. This will demonstrate commitment to the job training program and can also result in leveraging opportunities. As this slide indicates, you can learn a lot in meeting with employers, such as, what kind of organization or company is it? How large is it? What are their products or services? What's the entry-level wage? What's the minimum level of education, skills, knowledge, and certifications required for employment? Are there any restrictions or constraints that would prevent employment? Is there a requirement for a previous work experience? The employer's interest and ability to provide leveraged resources, and that's essential. Referrals to other companies that may also be interested in hiring trained graduates. Meeting with some companies, they may also turn you into the direction of other companies that they know are hiring as well. And then lastly, it'll gauge the interest of employers willing to serve on the all-important advisory committee. You definitely want employers serving on the advisory committee. And lastly, just kind of a checklist after meeting with employers, always leave with an action plan, commitment, or closure, and always invite the employer to attend graduations, attend the classes, and other special events or social events. Okay, with that, I will turn the baton over to Mike Sinew.
Thanks, Steve. You can switch to the next slide. You're probably thinking, after looking at the agenda, there are a lot of components that have to be completed to successfully implement this grant, and you're going to need some help. And the way we look for help is we've got three basic venues to look at. We've got subgrantees, we've got contractors, we call them fiscal partners, consultants, and then we have partners that we could leverage with using federal funds to get our subgrantees and partners, and then leveraging those federal funds to get other types of resources. The difference between a subgrantee and a fiscal partner is basically a subgrantee is written into the grant. He is essentially a subgrantee. He must obey all the rules and regulations that the grantee is responsible for. He may be audited just as the grantee would be. He does not have to compete to become a subgrantee. He's basically written into the grant. There's a big difference from the grants office between a subgrantee and a contractor, or what we call fiscal partners on this slide. The fiscal partners are, because money exchanging hands, they're subject to federal contracting rules, which is basically anyone spending over $10,000 would be required to get three proposals and choose the one most appropriate, not necessarily the least expensive, but the most appropriate person. You cannot use a sole source fiscal partner. You have to compete. So we're really concerned with both subgrantees and contractors of how you're going to be spending the federal money. And most of the regulations regarding the grants office would be how you treat those. Now, In case of subgrantees, they are as integral to the grant as the grantee. If you change subgrantees, it changes your whole application. You're going to have to go through your regional coordinators and address that issue. Fiscal partners or your contractors can be brought in later in the grant, but we will have to bid for them, submit bids. If they're going to help you write the grant, they cannot be, there is no quid pro quo on that. They will have to bid like every other vendor. That is how you would be spending the federal money to implement your grant. But partnerships don't just include subgrantees and fiscal partners. They include a whole lot of other people. They basically leverage the resources that you have available to expand the services provided to the participants. The first two, subgrantees and fiscal, they're concerned with spending federal money. But the whole other category is the category of leverage partners. They contribute basically to every activity in the program, including recruitment, screening, student services, training, and placement. These leverage partners are not using federal money. It could be included in the grant or may not be. You need to be working on your leveraging partners from the very beginning of the grant at the earliest stages, and it continues throughout the entire grant. You can change the slide. Next slide. There are three types of, I like to categorize them into three types of leverage partners: in-kind partners, philanthropic partners, and then a special category I call advisory committee, which we've already talked about slightly, and employers. And these are all partners that are working for you. Again, as I've said before, there's no federal funds that are exchanged between these people. They will help you because part of their mission is to help organizations like yourself. The in-kind partners, pretty much as it's described, it's an in-kind. They're providing services, time. They could provide wraparound services, whether it's childcare, transportation, housing, counseling. They provide life skills, technical training. They might provide administrative support. Some of these, you'll notice, if you read the RFA, childcare, transportation, some of these and stipends to some extent can be funded by the federal funds, but to the extent that you could use your leverage partners who are not getting federal funds, it would be preferable, because then you could spend those resources that you might be spending on childcare or transportation, you can be spending that on the core curriculum. So you will find that in-kind partners are eager to help you. This is a great program, and whether it's a social service organization or a church, a real faith-based or non-faith-based nonprofit, you'll find them eager to help you. Another type of leveraging that we really like is a philanthropic or volunteer support. These are people who provide discretionary funding. They like what you're doing, and they want to support your organization. They might give you computers, they might give you office space, they might give you facilities and equipment. They like what you are doing, and they might be investors in the community. They may be community leaders. They may be people who are not associated with the community at all, but they like the idea of what you're doing. Philanthropic and discretionary funding is really a good source of leverage funding because it's non-restricted usually. Sometimes it is, but often it isn't. You could use it for your graduation ceremonies. You could have special events. You could have taco night, and you could use it as stipends for your employees. It's totally unrestricted. And as before, these leverage funds are not being paid for by federal grants, so there's no restrictions on them, and you can use it as you wish. Next slide, please. The very special type of partnerships and leveraging I like to talk about is the value of advisory boards and employers and what they bring to the program. They provide you guidance, and they could do a lot more. Advisory boards can introduce you to people that you may not normally have introductions to. They could become in-kind contributors. They could become philanthropic contributors and partners. Advisory boards and employer relationships are just so involved in this. You want to establish your advisory board as early as possible. Actually, as you're writing the grant, you want to include your advisory board in your grant application. You would also, of course, want to get your employer committees going before you write the grant. And you'd want letters of commitment from those people to supercharge your grant application. They should be written into it. And again, try to get letters of commitment to help you out throughout the whole program. So this whole idea of resources that you're going to be paying for through federal grants, in the case of subgrantees and contractors or fiscal partners, and all the services you're going to be getting with leverage partnerships are really important in terms of completing the 8 components that we've been talking about today. Let's move on to the next component. Do you want to switch the slide?
Mm-hmm.
Screening and selection of student cohorts. You can switch the slide again. One of the most important, and of course all these components are important, but one of the most important components of implementing a successful job training program is your selection of your first student cohort. For those of you who are just starting, actually, every cohort is really important. It's like choosing a basketball team or a football team. The fate of your program is really going to depend on that class. They're going to make it easy for you, or they're going to make it really hard. In fact, we found over the years that one of the primary reasons for program failure is often can be attributed to a lack of attention to student recruitment and screening. What happens is people are not paying enough attention to their orientations and selection processes, which we'll talk about later. And they're allowing people to come into the program that probably shouldn't be there. Then, once they're in the program, about halfway through, they're leaving the program, or they're finding that it's too hard for them, or it's not what they really thought that they would be signing up for, and you're going to lose them. It is of critical importance that you spend the time to get the right class that you're going to be participating, that are going to be participating in your program. And let's say, how do we do that? You could switch the slide again. We want to use best practices, we call it, to reach and attract potential applicants. I look at it as a funnel. You want to get as many people applying for your program as possible. Then you want to start screening them, restricting them. You want to bring that large number of potential applicants to the best, most deserving group that you could find to start your program. You want to use best practices might include things like print posters, using social media, radio announcements. You might be putting posters up in grocery stores, laundromats, to get people to your orientation, your first orientation. You want as many people at that orientation as possible. You really want to use community partners who are familiar with the potential applicants. One of your best recruitment methods in terms of best practices are people that are influencers in the community. They hopefully will be on your advisory committee. They're going to know your program. And of course, if you've got an established program, your best recruitment advocates are graduates who've been through the program and have become successful. But again, you want to use community partners, influencers. You want to put whether it's matchbooks on buses, posters in laundromats. You want to get as many people to that orientation as possible. You want to have a first orientation, and you may have several. Again, it depends on how big your community is, whether you're in an urban or a rural area, but you're going to have an applicant orientation. And what's going to happen is you want to clearly define what this program's all about. You don't want to sugarcoat it. You want to spell out clearly what's it's going to involve, but you also want to talk about the advantages and what's going to happen when they graduate and they have all these certificates, and the demand for the people that have certificates and skills that you're going to be teaching. So the applicant orientation is very important. Part of that application, your orientation might be filling out application forms. I don't mean to be difficult, but the more difficult your application process is, you will lose a lot of people. But the people that pass through that application process will be the ones that are most deserving and probably the most motivated. So it's a little counterintuitive. Rather than making it easy to get in the program, you want to make it hard to get in the program. Again, it's all this process of honing down a large number of people. You may find after the first orientation, you're going to lose half of the people. You may, after you have them fill out application forms that might be a little difficult to fill out for some of them, you may lose another third. But this is part of the whole process of getting the best student cohort you can get. Then you start your candidate screening and assessments program. And we now have a group of people who have gone through orientation. They know what the program's all about. Now you're going to be screening them down. You may be administering drug tests, what's appropriate, depends on your location. You may be providing physicals. You may also be talking to their families. Again, what we're doing is we're getting from a large number of people to 15 or 20 candidates that are going to be the best class you could possibly have to go through your training program. This class that you're going to end up with will be the most motivated, the ones that are sticking to it. You may have tryouts where you'll have them do exercises together to see how they work in teams. You're going to have a group that actually they're going to start to bond before they even start the program, because the people at the end, there'll be a certain amount of prestige that they made it through the difficult screening process. And you finally reach this last stage. It's the applicant acceptance and student contracts. Now you're down to maybe 20 people. You may have 15 seats. You may have 25 people and you have 20 seats. It's always good to have some extras and have a wait list, that those who are very qualified and have gone through this whole screening process, you want to hold on to those people for your next cohort because they've already gone through the screening process. You may do other things like bring them in on a tentative basis where you're providing them life skills early on and then get into the core training program later. That way, if you have dropouts, they can fill the seats that are vacated. You want to make sure that you fill as many seats as you can with the most qualified and most deserving students. The very last thing you're going to be doing is having people sign student contracts. Now, what's a student contract? It isn't a binding legal document, but what it does is it provides an importance to this whole program, and it lays out the expectations you have of those students in your class and the expectations they should have from you when they graduate and what they can expect from you. The student contract also gives you leverage if you have problems later on in the program and you find that you have to reduce your class size because of a rotten apple, someone that doesn't belong in the program. So what I've talked about today is basically honing down and picking this really good class. And you're going to find out that when you pick this really good class, they're going to be easy to train. You're going to have low retention, high retention rates, and you're going to have very good placement because you've picked the cream of the crop. Again, limiting this number of seats to the 15 or 20 available slots that you have. So with that, I'm going to turn it back to Steve so he could talk to you about the next component, which is the safety and health and safety and training curriculum. Steve?
Okay, thanks, Mike. Hearing some feedback. Okay. I'm back again to talk about student safety, curriculum, and facilities and trainers. So let's take a look at this. As a former safety environmental compliance officer in private industry, there's nothing more important to me really than the safety and health, of our students. It's just absolute paramount. It's essential that job training programs promote safety and health standards, both in the classroom as part of the curriculum and even after graduation. This is applicable whether the training is being conducted by program staff or a contract trainer. When seeking potential employers, it's vitally important that they follow appropriate safety and health procedures. Before remediation training begins, grantees often provide a list of safety and health policies for students. Both students and trainers are asked to sign and date this document stating that they agree to comply with all safety policies and procedures. When environmental remediation, health and safety courses are provided, students are required to provide a medical waiver or undergo a physical examination. HAZWOPER, for example, requires program participants to sign a participant liability waiver and release of all claim forms. This is especially true if a self-contained breathing apparatus, known as the SCBA, is used during training. There is no single curriculum that is best suited for every Brownfields job training program. Grantees are given wide latitude to develop training programs as they see fit, as long as the courses offered align with EPA's funding priorities. These priorities are associated with the mission and goals of the EPA Office of Brownfields and Land Revitalization, also known as OBLR. The only required training is OSHA 29 CFR 1910-120, also known as the 40-hour HAZWOPER. Okay, a partial list here demonstrates the variety of technical curriculum offered that has been delivered by training programs over the last several years. You can see there's a number of OSHA courses, asbestos, forklift driver, also CDL, disaster site worker, underground storage tank, basic first aid, chemical safety awareness. These are just some examples. And I'm going to ask Tim to drop into the chat box right now the recently, as of yesterday, released list of eligible and ineligible Brownfield job training courses. Again, this has just come off the presses yesterday, lists over 100 courses that are eligible. It lists the courses that are ineligible, and there are a few courses that can be eligible under certain circumstances. So I think this list will be very beneficial to you, and I would encourage you to take a look at it. The key is all training must have a direct connection to facilitating the inventory of brownfield sites, site assessments, remediation of brownfield sites, community involvement, or site preparation. Program managers have found that many graduates require more than technical training provided by EPA Brownfields job training grants. Unfortunately, life skills and remedial education, while essential to graduate success, are not supported by the EPA grant. Even with selective recruitment and screening, refresher instruction may be necessary to bring the classroom to a literacy standard where training can be successful. As with life skills training, EPA does not support remedial education. Fortunately, many leveraging partners do provide life skills and remedial instruction. Those organizations include faith-based organizations, financial institutions, and nonprofits such as Goodwill and the YMCA. In addition to remedial math and science, the list in front of you there includes some life skills training that's provided as part of the job training life skills curriculum. Unsupported training, like the list in front of you here, is often front-loaded in the training schedule. This allows participants who may not be able to continue with technical training for whatever reason to be able to exit the program with helpful life skills. Okay, and this is a big question for everyone. Where do you find qualified trainers, facilities, and equipment? And we're going to go through a list of some of those for you. First bullet refers to the local community technical college, perhaps a four-year school or university. Trainers and facilities at the college level sometimes can make excellent leverage partners. They may even be offering a HAZWOPER course at their college. So you might be able to identify a trainer there, but certainly the facilities they have are usually top-notch. You can also look at instructors from other grant-supported programs offering training services to underserved or unemployed community residents. Then there's also facilities and trainers and equipment from the local government agencies, social service organizations, local businesses, religious organizations, and even community centers might be able to donate facilities that can be used for training. Potential employers are another source, potentially providing facilities, equipment, and instructors as a leverage partner. Contractors and training organizations providing specialized technical training. I ran programs at a couple different community colleges, and they were environmental health and safety classes, and I would frequently go to the local fire department and hire firefighters as adjunct faculty. They make excellent faculty members or instructors, and they also have flexible schedules which can work, with your situation. And on top of that, there's always the possibility that you might be able to use facilities they're familiar with or can identify. And oftentimes they can provide in-kind donations of like equipment and things to training programs. The last one there, OSHA, the link goes to outreach trainers. OSHA has a database of trainers nationwide, so you can go in and look and search it by city or state and find, OSHA outreach trainers that you might want to, take a look at. And then some organizations have found that developing instructors in-house is the most flexible and efficient way to deliver training. The organization on the screen here that I'm referring to is the National Partnership for Environmental Technology Education. They have a grant with the National Institute of Environmental Health Sciences. And with that grant, they have an organization called the Community College Consortium for Health and Safety Training. It's a little bit of a misnomer in that it's not just community college members that are part of that consortium, but folks from a lot of different organizations and even, individual folks, contractors. This is one of 18 model worker programs recognized by NIHS. And each year they hold a Train the Trainer Institute called the Greatest Institute. In fact, last week I was in Iowa at Scott Community College, and I observed this training, and 4 of our grantee organizations were participating. And one individual I spoke to said, we used to, farm the training out, but it just became much, we wanted to start looking at doing it in-house. And so that's why he was there getting the training. I should mention it's at no cost. And they also have a disaster site worker course that's offered every January as well. So there's the website link. Mike, Nolan, and I all know the folks at this organization. So feel free to reach out to them or ask us for additional information. So kind of in summary, here's a checklist for you in establishing curriculum, locating facilities. Very first thing on the checklist is make health and safety of students and graduates the top priority. That should really come first. Also, take a look at, your curriculum, make sure it matches, what the employer needs, are. Let the labor market assessment really drive and shape the curriculum. And ensure EPA will support the training. Now you have a brand new list that just came out yesterday, so you can kind of double check that as you kind of develop your program. And provide broad enough curriculum so that they have the most opportunity to be successful by broadening the curriculum. And the life skills training that I referred to earlier, and I think Mike referred to also, and student services are also essential and can be supported with leverage funding. And begin early. Recruiting qualified trainers, identifying facilities and equipment takes time. So you want to begin, that as soon as possible. And I'm going to ask Tim to drop this link into the chat box also. It's to something we call the Certified Employee Finder. And it is a PDF document of 49 of our grantees through the end, I think, of 2023. Will give you an idea of what some of the possibilities are. There are examples of technical supported curriculum, unsupported curriculum, life skills, and where we could obtain it. If they have social media sites, we listed it. For example, if they're on Instagram or Facebook, or they have their own website, we've listed it there. Some even have a YouTube channel where some of their training is, you can take a look at it. And it also has contact information for the folks running those programs, and I'm sure they'd be interested in helping you out. So encourage you to take a look at this document, and hopefully that helped. So let's see, at this point, I'd like to turn it back over to Mike.
We've gotten through pretty much of the program. Next slide. Steve has talked about some of the early components. Nolan got you through developing the program grant application. We've been talking to you about leveraging, about partnerships, about curriculum. Now we're going to talk about keeping your students in the program, getting them graduated, and getting them employed, which is the main purpose of this program, getting them employed. And as I said before, recruitment is such an important part of this. But recruitment and screening strategies, you could have the best class in the world, but by themselves, they don't guarantee 100% retention rates. We like to have 100% retention rates because we selected a select few out of many who are motivated and qualified to do this program. But sometimes something comes out of the blue, as it would for any of us, that may influence their ability to stay in class or attend class. These may be personal issues that come out of the blue. They may be financial burdens that they uncover later, street debt that they might have if they're ex-offenders. There might be personal legal issues. If they've got transportation or housing issues. It could be, even though they pass some of the screening tests as far as education, math, and science, they have some remedial education issues that is keeping them from successfully completing the program. These are all issues that could add to lower retention and inability to graduate, which defeats the whole purpose of the program. So we want to look at those, and we want to see what we can do to that. Now, the EPA this year has recognized the importance of transportation, childcare, stipends, and they will, as I said before, and I'm repeating myself, will allow you to use grant money to use the federal funds for some of those retention services. My recommendation is, if you don't have to use leverage funding, which we talked about earlier, there are plenty of organizations that are willing to help you. The next slide, please. Local banks, Health and Human Services, faith-based organizations, they provide childcare services, whether it's a Goodwill whether it's a church, whether it's a community center, corporate and foundation supports. We'll provide stipends during training. Prospective employers who are your partners may provide part-time jobs and internships during training to help alleviate some of the financial issues that students might have and may have to drop out because they can't support their family or if they're going through training. Local community centers, fast food restaurants are fantastic. They will voluntarily provide you with lunches, your students with lunches. And we talked about this in partnering. These are the non-restrictive funds that your leverage partners can provide, that you could provide lunches. McDonald's or Burger King might provide lunches. They will come over and help you. Legal aid, counseling. Many of these programs will help you. It's very important to use these and to teach them out, because they, again, all contribute to raising your retention rates, and the goal is 100%. You could switch to the next slide. I don't want to, there we go. I don't want to underestimate one of the most powerful tools in retaining your students, and that's peer-to-peer support. We don't think about peer-to-peer support, but it is incredibly important. It can include student support, circles and mentorships, what I'll talk about, peer-to-peer counseling, peer-to-peer training, encouragement to stay in the program, lessons from graduates who have learned the lessons, the hard lessons, and encourage people to stay in the program. It is very important in your selection process to form a group, a class. And these people need to bond because they're going to be working as a team when they graduate. They need to identify with the class, and they need to help each other. And when one of the weakest in the class can be helped by one of the stronger people, understand a concept, or perhaps feel this is too hard for him or not right for him, his buddies can keep him in the program. This is a really strong retention service. It's goes, nobody really talks about it too much. Many programs recognize this. They have what we call circles, where every morning they'll form a circle and they'll just talk as a group. Many will informally have more mature participants mentor younger participants. This happens often with ex-offenders, people returning citizens. It's very important that someone who has been through some of the hardships that some of the people entering your program have undergone to mentor someone who hasn't experienced this yet. And this is a really something that every program manager should keep in mind and encourage, is this relationship between his participants. And it could be, you'll have dress codes where everyone will have certain clothing that will identify with the group. And again, it's a reason not to drop out of the group, because they look at themselves as a little bit privileged, special than other people. They're making something of themselves, and it's worth the hard work and effort. So look at all of those strategies and keep them in mind when you're looking at trying to keep your retention rates shooting for 100%. You could go to the next slide. One thing I would just caution everyone is student populations with special needs may have additional challenges for student retention. We're talking about perhaps a disabled population, returning citizens. They may have special needs and may need additional mentoring, particularly peer-to-peer mentoring. They may need more help than some of the students that don't have those special situations. So keep this in mind. And many of our best programs will make sure, whether it's parole officers come to the program, they'll have caseworkers. We have as many as 3 caseworkers per student coming. These are all leveraged partnerships. They come and they work with the students. You might have people working with mental counseling, financial counseling, and earlier we talked about all the sources of these. So seek those out as your partners. So in summary of this particular component of job training programs, is the pathway to higher retention rates really begins with careful recruitment and screening practices that I talked about earlier. But remember that student support can take many forms. They include individual counseling, team building, and mentoring strategies, and always aimed at getting your first class through the training into graduation. And with that, I'm going to turn it over back to Steve to talk about the final part of the whole process, which is graduation, placement, and tracking. So Steve, why don't you take it from here?
Okay, Mike, thank you. Okay. Well, let me begin by saying graduation, placement, and tracking are essential components of any job training program. It is expected that grantees will place at least 70% of their graduates and track them after employment. And you might remember in Matt's earlier slide that, like 75% have achieved employment. So 70% is what's expected, and it's not unreasonable. Employment expectations, considering program participants completing the course of study, they've been vetted, screened, and carry with them as much as $5,000 worth of certification. So it's important that program managers begin planning graduation, placement, and tracking at the beginning of each cohort rather than the end. Oops, let me go back here. Student graduation is the culmination of a career building path, starting with the acceptance into the Brownfields Job Training Program, completing challenging instruction and successfully obtaining certification credentials is a big thing. Graduation from this program is perhaps the most important academic achievement these individuals have had since high school graduation or getting a GED. Graduation should be celebrated by having an invitation list that includes the individuals listed on the screen. In the past, even the EPA regional coordinators sometimes have attended graduations, as well as the EPA administrator, the mayor, and even members of Congress. Recordings should be made available to students and guests with certificates awarded for special accomplishments. Some job training graduations are broadcast over Zoom or social media for relatives and other interested guests who cannot be present for the ceremony. For example, thanks to this technology, I attended the graduation ceremony of Santa Fe Community College, where our speaker, who's going to be talking to you shortly, Janet Curley, works. It was a great experience seeing the graduates being presented certificates and talking about their experiences. They were justifiably proud, and it was uplifting to watch. Okay, now let's talk about placement. Graduate placement works best when employers have established relationships and interact with students before graduation. Employers can utilize federal and local hiring incentives, including first source or local hiring ordinances, tax incentives, and wage subsidies to find a trained and certified workforce. The most successful grantees establish ongoing relationships with employers who have hired graduates and been impressed with their performance in the past. Here are some examples of ways placement staff can establish lasting relationships with potential employers. You can see the list in front of you. Have them work, with you on curriculum development. Invite them to attend job training, social events, informational meetings, maybe participate even in grant writing or the review process, act as mentors and advisors, volunteer as instructors or guest speakers, and then of course, requesting letters of support from them, requesting commitment to consider hiring job training graduates. Employer partnership should not be the only strategy when finding meaningful jobs for program graduates. Here are some examples that can contribute to a multifaceted placement strategy. Additional program job placement activities such as open house events, participation in public meetings, and cold calls to human resource personnel may uncover new employers that otherwise would have fallen through the cracks during the normal placement process. Career one-stop centers provide job placement services with staff and resources allocated to placement. Internships, pre-apprenticeship programs, and company visitations can assist in establishing co-op programs, which can be an effective strategy for placing graduates. Professional employment services locate and employ candidates with specialized high-demand skills. And one of my favorites is personal networking, which has always been an effective approach for identifying employment opportunities. Networking is essentially connecting those interested in employment with those looking to expand their workforce. Encouraging graduates to attend environmental conferences and public meetings provide opportunities that can bring employers and graduates together. Many communities and employment service organizations also sponsor periodic job fairs. Job fairs address a variety of occupations, so they become excellent opportunities for networking and identifying companies not normally recognized for employing environmental technicians. Maintaining relationships with students after graduation is difficult and takes extra effort. Because it is challenging, tracking is often neglected. Alumni tracking is an activity that can last years after the students graduate. Tracking provides valuable information regarding the effectiveness of the job training program. Additional reasons for maintaining close relationships with former students include the list in front of you here. Graduates can be excellent resources and guidance and helping to mentor current students. They can become role models. That's often the case. Graduates with certifications may need refreshers, so you can invite them back for a refresher course. And graduates may become a resource for training as instructors. And then in those cases where job expectations are not fulfilled, allowing them to come back and help them with job placement assistance, is also important. Other strategies that can be used to attract graduates include the list here, establishing alumni nights, other social events, inviting them to be a guest speaker, providing job search counseling to former graduates, again, maintaining a current contact list for past program participants, and always include them on program announcements. Tracking progress of former graduates, including pre-apprenticeships, with them entering union employment, and again, offering incentives such as refreshers I just mentioned. And then asking former students to be advocates for the program. Maybe they can serve on the advisory board. They're actually excellent for that purpose because they've been through the training program and they know a lot about the program and the skills required on the job. And some organizations will hire graduates, as program staff. So there's lots of ways to track students. And one other one that I don't want to overlook, and that is another strategy used by some grantees to track lost grantees, is to tap into a database maintained and supported by the local workforce investment boards, the WIBs. Contact the local employment office on the availability of the service for job training and grant recipients. Just in summary, to make graduate tracking effective, program managers and instructors have a responsibility to make graduates feel welcome, encourage them to participate in post-graduation events, and give them a reason to maintain contact. In most cases, Brownfield's job training graduates are happy to assist a program that has made a difference in their lives. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Curtis. Nolan?
Thank you, Steve, and thank you, Mike. Let's do a quick time check because we're running a little long and we have much more of the program, including the cherry on top of the sundae. With somebody who's been there and done that. But I'll go on with the last of our 8 sections on program sustainability. Next slide, please. So as part of the Brownfields job training application evaluation, EPA is interested in the extent to which applicants have a plan to continue their environmental training program beyond the first round of funding. Partnership development, resource leveraging, and sustainability considerations remain an essential part of the training program, with the possibility of continued EPA support. Program sustainability is a best practice when a job training program includes a plan for continued operations. So you've gone through all this effort, and there's no reason to do it once. So the idea is, how do you keep the program going, both with the EPA funding and or additional funding and partnerships. Next slide, please. Here are some examples of strategies for maturing the programs interested in continuing the job training program after the current EPA grant comes to an end. So again, you can re-up, but these are also strategies. And because of time constraints, I won't elaborate on the list of strategies that are listed. However, our companion document provides further details on each of the strategies listed on the slides. Next slide, please. In conclusion, sustainability is closely related to partnership development and resource leveraging. When addressing program sustainability, grantees should always consider developing relationships with organizations capable of continuing their involvement with environmental job training into the future. This will ensure that the programs are considering the issues of sustainability when federal assistance ends. Next slide, please. It's now my great pleasure to introduce Janet Curley. Janet is Director of EHS Contract Training at Santa Fe Community College. She's the project manager for SFCC's Environmental Technician Job Training Program, and SFCC is currently beginning its 4th EPA Brownfields Job Training Program grant. So here's somebody who's truly walked the walk, not just talked the talk, been there, done that. It's my pleasure to introduce Janet Curley. Janet.
Thank you, Nolan. And I want to encourage anyone out in the audience to take their time to not be afraid of all of the different aspects that my coworkers here have just presented to you. First of all, can you go to the next slide for me, Steve? I just want to show you how we did not start out with everything working perfectly, and you know that's a realistic statement. But you can see that we got a grant. We applied for and received a grant in 2011. But after we did our first grant, we kind of took a couple of years off, to kind of evaluate what was this experience and was it worth it. And our decision was, yeah, this is worth it. It was more worth it to our community. And you can see that we, our placement rate has, the number of people that we trained and that we placed in environmental jobs. And we really focused on putting people into full-time jobs, not part-time jobs. And of course, you see the third grant. I think everybody out there was really impacted by the pandemic restrictions that went into place. I know here in New Mexico, we were limited to 10 people in a room at any given time. So, you know, one of the other things that I want to make real clear to everyone is, when you're out here, as complicated as these grants are, the planning, the coordinating of your resources, finding the right students, training those students, retaining them and placing them, there's a lot of people out there that will help you, and especially your EPA staff and the TAB staff and a lot of the other organizations. Next slide. Steve. Let me just briefly summarize what some of the advantages to Santa Fe Community College were by actually getting in and participating in this program. It allowed us to be able to purchase the equipment to expand our environmental health and safety training program to the businesses in the northern New Mexico area. And I would also say that through these grants, it allowed us to connect with our community through these partnerships and leveraging. You know, sometimes organizations, you get used and you're dealing just with a normal set of clients or type of clients. This grant helped us reach out further into our community and throughout the northern New Mexico area. And at least for us, an additional benefit was our graduates started to come back and actually enroll and take classes at Santa Fe Community College, which helped some of the other departments that in our program. And most importantly was we were able to provide trained, skill-based workers who could go out and get livable wage positions. And I don't want to say job training, because environmental health and safety is career training. Once you get on this path, there are many, many opportunities for these people to apply the skill sets that we give them. Next slide, Steve. But I do want to make sure that as a reality check, you understand this process is competitive and it is time consuming, but totally worth it for the reasons that I just mentioned in the previous slide. What you need is a team of people who are committed to this type of a project. You know, maybe you need, you know, as was previously mentioned, you need, you know, the mentor person. I find that once we got people into the program, they saw the benefits, they stayed because they felt that they were doing something positive for our community. I cannot say to you, tracking of the students after graduation is especially difficult. I can't tell you how many times I've asked the EPA if they would pay for me to get a private detective, okay? I've been at people's grandmother's house in the evening, knocking on her door saying, hey, where is your grandperson, you know, grandson or granddaughter? It is challenging, but I will point out, it's not just this job training program. Even in the higher education and other federal funding, they're starting to require us to track students and where they end up so that we know where taxpayers' money is being effectively spent. And I cannot emphasize enough, utilize the resources that are provided by the EPA throughout this entire process. I don't think you'll ever find a group of people more committed to your success and your program success than this particular program. So last slide, Steve. And I have to tell you that this is a very meaningful job. Some of the best work I've done in my career, and I've been doing this for over 40 years, is helping other people find their way in this world and finding a path of success for work that is rewarding for them and that allows them to support their families. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Steve.
Thank you, Janet. And we have a few minutes. I know we promised to have you out by right about now. We just have a few more minutes to go, and it looks like we have about 90% of you still as a captured audience. So we'll take about 3 to 5 minutes to answer any questions that you might have. I think many of the questions in the chat were answered. One that came up was about contact information, and that will come right after this Q&A. But I don't know if there's any more questions that we need to answer. So I'll let Steve and Mike kind of weigh in on what's in the chat room. Or if you have a question, just speak up. I guess turn your mute off and have at it. Have we answered everything that's in the chat?
Yeah, no, and I think we're pretty set. It looks like between Blaze and I, we've been you know, handling these questions.
Okay, so we're going to move on then. And so next slide, please.
Let's see.
Okay, so there's critical points to remember. We've covered during this webinar, we discussed 8 essential components of establishing a successful Brownfields job training program in starting your program and conducting and sustaining your training program. So again, you see the components, and the application deadline once again is August 15th. It's just a reminder that this webinar has been recorded, and we encourage you to download the companion document that covers all of the points we discussed today, and probably a little more detail even than what we talked about. Next slide, please. We've listed the EPA job training coordinator points of contact and the regional tab points of contact. Next slide. Next slide. Next slide. Next slide. So these are your main and best sources of information and advice throughout this application process. And again, as Janet emphasized, you won't find a group of people who are more committed to this program and to your success and establishing successful job training programs in your community than the people on this contact list and their colleagues. Next slide, please. It's really important that we hear back from you, and we want to hear your feedback. So there's a link that you can click, and there's an address in the chat box, or you can scan the QR code. But this is a very quick little survey, but it's important to us to know what you think, and it helps us to improve our services to you. So if you could please take a moment and go into the chat box for this link and or use your phone to click on the QR. And I guess, you know, again, we just encourage you to respond to this feedback that's been provided. Next slide, please. So we'd like to acknowledge and thank the many minds and hands that made this production possible, especially Matt Washy from EPA, Blaise Levin, Director of KSU TAB, Janet Curley, our Director, Janet Curley, the Director of EHS Contract Training at Santa Fe Community College, our unsung hero, Tim Hunter of Lucid Waste Solution, who's been providing all the IT and technical support for this. Please give them a virtual round of applause. The deafening silence will gladden our hearts. I also want to thank my KSU colleagues, Mike Senu and Steve Fenton. But most of all, I want to thank all of you for your time, for your attention, and thank you. Next slide, please. You may also contact us, Blaise Levin, who's the KSU TAB Director, or Mike, Steve, or myself. You can download this webinar and companion text at the address given and join our next webinar, Tips on Writing a Competitive EPA Job Training Proposal, and that will be on June 12th. Next slide. Thank you. So again, we really appreciate your time and attention, and please fill out the survey and don't hesitate to contact us. And with that, we are adjourned.